Welcome back to another episode of the Decision Hour. I'm your host, Adam Bird. Folks, I got a hot one lined up for you today. A little backstory on this real quick. My guest today, I met her, we'll say a couple months ago. And actually, honestly, I didn't even met her. We were at the same event, never talked to each other. We just kind of like saw each other in passing. And then we got introduced by a mutual friend, HMG member Shay Sparks had introduced us. Very interesting young lady, super smart. For all you veterans out there, you're definitely going to want to pay attention to this one. Get your notes ready, folks. I got my new friend, Holly Joy McCabe, joining us today. Holly, how are you?
I'm great. How are you?
I am fantastic. Thank you for taking time out of your busy schedule to join us today and coming on the show.
Yeah, I'm really, really excited to share everything.
I want to dive right into this. Let's get a little bit of your backstory here a little bit. So who is Holly? Tell us a little bit about yourself.
Yeah, so I'm a neurosomatic trauma therapist. I basically specialize with working with the brain, the nervous system, and the body relevant to healing trauma and also optimizing performance. Um, I could go into a long tirade about, clinical certifications and licenses and everything, but that tends to go in one ear and out the other. I like to tend to tell people about how I got to this point,
Yeah.
which is kind of my own journey through trauma, a brain injury, and an assault, and a lot of different things. So if that's an okay place to jump off, I can kind of give a little backstory there.
Please.
Yeah, so basically, I grew up, like many people, with a very, very abusive childhood. I was in a cult religion. I had actually attempted suicide at 14 years old because it was a very hostile situation. And I basically ran away at 16 because I knew if I didn't escape that home environment that I wasn't going to make it. And so I was a missing person. I was basically living on the streets. I was in a lot of rough situations very, very early on. And then I also had this music dream. So after a couple of years of working multiple jobs and really basically working 24/7, a lot of stress and trauma there, I moved to Nashville and decided to pursue this music dream. And at 19, I was bartending, paying a lot of bills and stuff. And I went through a really violent assault. It was a aggressive head injury. I was assaulted with a 10-pound steel dumbbell of all things to the back of the head. And at the time, I'm 19. I have no parents, no family. I'm just surviving. I'm bartending, supporting myself. And I went to the emergency room. I got immediate care. I got staples in the back of my head, and I was kind of just discharged out. I had no insurance or any ability to get any care after that. But I knew something was wrong because right away my memory was like lost. I was waitressing and I would go up and I would ask somebody, I was like, hey, what can I get you to drink? And they would say a Bud Light. And I would walk up to the computer to put in the order and I would completely forget what they said. And so that was like the only sign that was really recognizable because I was basically in survival mode. I was, again, supporting myself, working 3 different jobs, classic fight or flight. And to fast forward the story, I was in health and fitness at that time. So I kind of had these dual lives. I was bartending at night, drinking, and then in health and fitness. And it was like these 2 tandem worlds, sort of. But pretty much working 24/7 was the common theme there, and also in quite a few abusive, toxic relationships. So around the time that I was 21, I actually got a DUI. And a big part of the DUI situation was I was approached by a man at a bar, outside of a bar. I walked outside of the bar to get a breather, and I had been drinking a lot. And he approached me, and it triggered such a fear-based response because of my childhood and abuse and because of this assault and all these different things that I completely panicked. And I grabbed my keys and I got in my truck and I ferociously drove home and got pulled over as I was pulling into my apartment complex. And so basically 21 with all these dreams of a music career and health and fitness and everything, I'm in the back of a police car and I'm like, really need to change my life. Like this was not in the plan. And that's when I started taking health and fitness really seriously. And kind of started reading personal development and psychology and self-help and really decided to shift gears towards health and fitness. So that's a little bit of the early backstory. Then I can put the rest in a
Yeah.
nutshell. Go ahead.
No, yeah. I mean, that's my God, that's a lot. And when you think about it, what did you say? 14, you left 16, 21. I mean, that's a small time period too. So what
Yeah,
happened after that then?
it was very, very condensed. And I mean, there was drugs and alcohol, and I was trying to pursue my music dreams, and that's all sex, drugs, and rock and roll. And there was a lot of traumas and different things in there. Like there was a lot more condensed in that time too. But basically at 21 in the police car, I was just like, okay, I'm going down the wrong road here. Like if I don't stop, something really bad is going to happen. And so I left Nashville. I moved to this town in the middle of nowhere, Indiana, and I was kind of like, I got to get my head straight. And that's when I started studying like personal development and psychology, and again, really shifting towards health and fitness with
Yeah.
my studies. And so I had the dream then that I wanted to start a business, and I started preparing for all of these things. I moved back to Nashville, started my business at 23, and it was really just health and fitness and wellness. But I learned very early on, not only from my own traumas, but from everybody that I was working with. I was like, all these people want to lose weight and they want to get in shape, and they kind of know what to eat and they know they should work out, but there's something stopping them. And so that's when I started shifting a lot deeper into the psychology of trauma and the subconscious mind and all of these different things that I knew were a lot more of the picture than someone just not knowing what to eat or how to exercise.
Yeah.
And so I started incorporating that into my nutrition and training. And then it all really changed for me at 24, because I had sort of reached this point where outrunning and pushing through all of the symptoms that I had had from my brain injury was coming to an end. And I was dealing with a lot of physical issues, like brain fog, migraines all the time, exhaustion. Like I don't think I slept a day in my life until I was probably 30 years old. There was just all these symptoms. And I was like, something deeper is going on here. And so when I enrolled in the Natural Health Institute, which is where I was introduced to somatic studies, what I do now, I'll never forget the day that I was in the class and I started learning about how trauma is in our bodies, and it holds on to these traumas and these things in our cells and our organs. And if we don't heal it and we don't release it, it's with us causing all of this destruction. And I just kind of remember like light bulb, light bulb, light bulb. I was like, this is the missing piece. There's like health, nutrition, psychology, self-help, subconscious mind. But then there's this whole thing called the nervous system and the brain and the body. And that was 16 years ago. And that was what changed everything for me. That was what set the stage for me really studying the nervous system, trauma, and sort of blending it in this holistic ecosystem. Because again, health and nutrition and mindset work, all of those things matter, but they're not the whole picture. And they're kind of presented as if they're the solution. Like just eat right and exercise and all your problems will be fixed, or just think right, you know? And so, yeah, I've just over the last 16, 17 years continued to build out this knowledge base. I finally got the official diagnosis of my own brain injury and the nervous system illness that I developed because of it, which left me very chronically sick for about 5 years. I was completely bedbound after things had progressed so long. But I've basically kind of been on this my own journey of healing my own traumas, recognizing all these different pieces, and then creating the method that I did that helps other people. But it was all through an assault, trauma, a lot of different stress, and different things that aren't commonly looked at as that big of a deal. You work a lot, you know, you train hard. Maybe the assault would have been looked at as a big deal, but there's so many things we go through in life that are kind of brushed off and we're told we should just push through. But they really took a substantial toll on my mental and physical health and my nervous system. And now that's why the nervous system and brain is like my biggest passion, because it's the number one thing. So
I want to dissect this because you said a lot there, and one of the things I heard was when you're bringing up trauma. So are you and your focus is the central nervous system, right? So is that where did you say that's where a lot of the past trauma is held within the nervous system there? And then if that is the case, then my question is, what's the best way? Is there one particular way or the best practice that can heal trauma that's been there for so long. And I guess, I'm sorry, I got to ask another question with that, I guess, is for those that are listening, maybe there's somebody out there that doesn't realize that there's something there that, that I'm guilty of this, is sometimes something will bother me, or I'll just get irritated and whatnot. And I can't even talk right now. And I'm not really sure what it is. And I've had people say, it's something from your past or whatnot that's just stewing and that you haven't let go. And I'm just like, that's great. Somebody point that out. I have no idea what it is.
You're like, cool. Now what do I do with it? Right. Yeah. So to break this down and in kind of like a 101 level, if this is a new concept, the nervous system is like a memory bank. And the way I refer to it, to kind of, I think analogies are so powerful. And the nervous system and the brain are obviously very complex sciences that could take years to explain and understand. But analogies simplify this in such a powerful way, but it's actually incredibly relevant. So I describe the nervous system like a supercomputer. And it's got all of these incredible capabilities. It controls everything. There's all these different things that it can do. But if you've ever had an iPhone or a computer that doesn't get updated and it has all these apps downloaded and it starts to get really slow and clunky, and then there's viruses on it, that's kind of like your nervous system too. We go through these experiences and your nervous system is taking data. It's basically doing math for you of, was that a good experience? Was that a bad experience? Was that a dangerous experience? And it's filing it away beneath your conscious awareness into sort of programs that make you behave a certain way, that make you react a certain way, that make you feel a certain way. And so they're actually called inputs. It's the stress, it's the argument with somebody, it's you got your heart broken, it's the car wreck, it was, for veterans, obviously war and being afraid for your life. There's all these different things from childhood and throughout life that imprint us. And when we don't know how to actually process them out and like delete the files, which nobody does because we're not taught this unless you come to see someone specialized in this field, it clunks up and it clunks up and it clunks up. And then your supercomputer basically turns into a junk drawer where nothing's really working correctly. And you've got all this different junk and trauma and it's clunking up the system. And a junk drawer and a supercomputer are two very different things. They can achieve very, very different things. And so when people are dealing with chronic states of shut down, feeling numb, disconnected, depression, anxiety, physical symptoms, for women, it tends to be more like autoimmune based. For men, it's more just like, I always feel angry and I'm just like hostile and I feel on edge. There's so many different dynamics, but essentially, every negative experience or symptom that you have, mental or physical or emotional, is being informed by your supercomputer. Your nervous system is telling, it's like the baseline. So people think that emotions and thoughts are like this separate thing, but your nervous system is actually what's kind of telling you what to think and feel. So you've got all this lifetime of stress and trauma that's unresolved. It's in your nervous system and it's sort of always running there 24/7, no matter what you do, no matter how much you exercise or try to think positively, the pain and the trauma is in your nervous system. So if you don't go there to that level and learn to release it and then reprogram and recalibrate it, update the software, put the right programs on, you're in a chronic dysfunctional state. And that's kind of how it works.
So how do you fix it?
Well, there's this one pill that you can take now. And I created it. No, so it's obviously a process. I mean, I always tell people, like, if I meet somebody and they're 50 years old, I'm like, you've got 50 years of programs and trauma and beliefs and this wiring, because the nervous system creates pathways in the brain that are like well-worn paths. If you've ever seen like a field of grass and there's a pathway, the more you go down it, the deeper the paths. So this is why people try so hard to make positive change, but they can't, is because they don't understand the neuroscience of change, for one thing, and they don't understand that their nervous system is so used to going down this pathway. For example, we'll take like an addict, somebody who drinks because they get so stressed. And when the stress reaches a level that they can't handle, they need to come home and they need to drink to deal with that pain, right? It's bubbling to the surface. Well, that pathway for years, decades sometimes has been well worn. And then they decide, I'm going to quit drinking because it's a problem. Their nervous system is wired here. Their brain is wired in this direction. This is how we deal with pain. You can't just decide you're going to quit and switch paths in a completely different direction when your nervous system and your brain are going this way. And I explain it like this: the conscious thinking mind is 5% of the equation. The nervous system and brain are 95. So when 5% of you wants to make the change and stop drinking, or communicate effectively with your spouse, or whatever positive change you want to make, and 95 is taking you down this direction, it's pretty easy to do the math on that. So to answer your question, you've got a lot that's working against you.
Yeah.
And for many, many years. For me, and the method that I developed, and I'm not trying to do a plug for it, I'm just trying to explain a little bit why it's so different, is because in my journey, I found that all these singular pieces left me, they're missing gaps, right? And so you want to work on the mindset, you want to work on the physical body with somatic exercises, you want to calibrate the nervous system, but then there's the talk therapy, kind of the psychology of analyzing and developing self-awareness and stuff, as well as the brain reprogramming and rewiring. So there's this whole spectrum, which can sound overwhelming at first. And it is if you're doing 100 different methods, which is what a lot of people do too. People are in pain, they're in dysfunction, they're having problems in their relationship, health issues. They go to a therapist, they go to a personal trainer, they go and do psychedelic medicine. They do all of these individual things, but it's not connected. And so it's never really sustainable or systemic in a way. So from my approach and my beliefs from studying this stuff from 20 different years and studying all these different legs clinically and going through my professional journey, you need to take a multifaceted approach. The core fundamentals that you want to be able to work on are obviously the nervous system.
Okay.
And that's with direct specific modalities and tools that we'll discuss. The brain, because you have to know how to rewire these pathways so that they don't keep going rogue. The body, which is literally your physical body, not everything included, but like your actual physical body, because that's where a lot of the input to the nervous system comes from, 80% actually. The subconscious mind, which is all those beliefs and patterns that are beneath the surface, 95%. And then the actual conscious mind, the thinking mind, the thought processes, mindset, cognitive, kind of philosophical things. When you combine all 5 of those, that's how you can start changing things. But even though that sounds like a lot, and it's like, okay, either I need to hire 20 different professionals or do this huge intensive process, the good news is you can actually start moving the needle on all of these in the best way by working at your nervous system. Like that's like ground level 0. If you don't get that in check, none of those other things are going to matter. And you can do that with very, very simple tools. I don't know how in depth you want to go into some of the options, but
what are some of the tools? And then, let's start there. What are some of the tools that you can use? Because what I'm hearing you saying, there's a lot of different. I know there's a lot of different. I don't want to say therapies, but for lack of a better word, that's one. You mentioned therapy, where like talk therapy. You mentioned, there's alternative medicines and stuff like that. That's really getting big over the last couple of years.
Yeah,
but. Is that kind of what you're talking about right now on an individual basis? Because if that's the case, then I want to explore a few of those. But what exactly, how does one get started, or where do they start?
Yeah. So I'll answer your question in kind of 2 different segments, okay, because there's 2 different elements to that. One, most people who have been in really dysfunctional states, physically, mentally, emotionally, they're suffering, they've probably tried one of those things. They've went to a therapist, and it more likely than not actually was terrible for them because their nervous system was so dysregulated that they went and talked, and then the therapist had no ability to recognize what was happening in their nervous system or how traumatizing even talking about those things were to people.
Is that why like talk therapy and stuff fails so much when it comes to like struggling with like PTSD and trauma and stuff like that?
It makes it 100 times worse. And that's a very controversial statement that will probably make a lot of people angry, but I will die on that hill, because when your nervous system and your body is so overloaded with stress and trauma,
yeah,
and it's stuffed it down, and typically used very negative coping mechanisms like alcohol, drinking, binge scrolling, whatever it is. There's a million different ways we can disconnect from our body to not feel things.
Yeah.
And then you sit somebody down in front of someone that they don't know, they don't trust, and they're like, talk about all your problems for the next 60, 90 minutes. They start bringing it to the surface. They're being probed for questions, and it's so destabilizing. It's so scary to the body. The body, again, is thinking on its own terms. It's like we stuffed this down for a reason. It was too dangerous to feel this. And so you bring it all to the surface. You're given no tools to process it, no tools to regulate or release, no pacing. It's the equivalent of taking someone who's morbidly obese, who's never worked out a day in their life, into a CrossFit workout and saying, do 3 hours of CrossFit. Just do it because this will be great for you. It's that asinine, really. And it definitely is kind of a passionate topic for me because psychology is a very intelligent field. Talk therapy and all of that, like it's a very in-depth field that has a lot of research to it. But we have this alternate field that knows the way trauma impacts our nervous system and how talking about things and the tools that we need. And there's just this disconnect where these worlds are like opposite ends of the universe, and they should be like this. It's happening, but it's taking a long time. So yes, very often people go to talk therapy after trauma, abuse, PTSD, all of this, and it makes them substantially worse. And so then it not only adds to their trauma and their dysregulation, but then the one thing that they're told is supposed to help them heal gets filed away in their nervous system as that was terrible. Never do that again. So they lock down even more, even more. So then a friend tries to talk to them and get them to open up. And they're like, I don't think so. Like, there's no way I'm bringing that because I just had to relive that trauma.
Right.
And I wasn't given any tools. So when you're talking about your trauma, when it hasn't been appropriately healed and dealt with, you're bringing it to the surface and you're experiencing it again. That is actually the same thing that flashbacks are and night terrors. And by the way, a big part of my story that I didn't mention earlier, which is super relevant to why I'm passionate about working with veterans, is I was engaged to a veteran who not only tried to take his own life in front of me numerous times, but tried to take my life numerous times. And I went through this journey of him coming back from deployments and night terrors and waking up and trying to choke me out. And I was the threat. There's a million different elements to that. But those night terrors, that is your body reliving the trauma. It's the nervous system trying to bring it back to the surface because it wants you to heal it. We're not given the tools. So it literally happens at night when our systems are kind of relaxed, where it's literally like, we need to get this out. Well, you go to talk therapy and you're basically consciously doing that by bringing it to the surface too, but there's still no exit. There's no endpoint. So it just stays in a chronic loop inside your body, like a little hamster on a wheel. And every time you go through that, every night terror, every flashback, or every talk therapy session that you go through without the appropriate tools, it's re-traumatizing your system. You just went to war again in your sleep, and you just went to war again when you sat down and tried to talk to your therapist. That's really important to know. Again, when these are the things that are told, people are told will help them and actually make it worse. So to circle back around to your original question, what can we do? The very first step that people can do on their own with a lot of free tools and they need to start kind of building on is basically something called somatic practices and neurodrills. Now, neurodrills are a lot more advanced, and I only recommend people doing these with practitioners because you have to have some guidance to be able to test and assess. It's kind of like working with a nutritionist or a doctor to make sure the medicine's appropriate. It needs to be calibrated.
Okay.
Somatic tools are a little gentler, and typically anyone can do those, and they start to bring the body out of that state of threat, fear, trauma, into a state of I'm safe, I'm okay. When you've been in chronic stress, trauma, fight, flight your entire life, and that's the only zone you know, it takes some specific tools to start dropping down, and you have to go very lightly.
Can you give us an example of some of those tools?
Yeah. So a great one and the simplest one is an extended exhale. So an extended exhale, most of us, we take 22,000 breaths a day, right? And most of them are dysfunctional breaths. We don't know how to breathe. We breathe very poorly. And when we are stressed and we have trauma, we're breathing basically right here, very upper chest, very short, shallow breaths. And when that's happening, that is sending 22,000 signals to your brain and nervous system that you are in danger. When you can interrupt that, and you can actually consciously exhale. So everybody that's listening, and you can even do it right now. All you do is take a normal inhale and then exhale just a second or two longer than you normally would. That's it. Doesn't have to be super, calibrated or counted. If you extend that exhale just for a second or two, for one, becoming conscious of your breath will interrupt the automatic thought loop. But when you are slowly exhaling, that sends the message to your brain and nervous system that says, we're not in danger. Because if a lion was chasing you and you were about to die, you would not be slowing down to exhale slowly. So the breath is a really, really powerful way to control our nervous system state. And it tends to be working against us because we breathe very dysfunctionally. Again, very stressed, very quick.
So when it comes to like breathing exercises, then that's kind of what I'm hearing. Is this like a practice that, and for those that are listening, that little pause, we were literally both taking a deep breath and long exhale. It's amazing how you feel. You saw me do it a little bit off screen here, just a little bit, but it was like immediate calmness, a little more relaxed.
Yeah.
Right. And is this like a practice that people can do like daily or should be doing daily? And if so, is this something that they could do several times throughout the day? Or is this also like one of those kind of like meditations, like you should be getting up in the morning and before you start your day, work on your breath type of thing?
Yeah. So with this one is, again, if you are breathing 22,000 times a day,
yeah,
if you can even interrupt 10 of those breaths, that's a good starting point. We're so conditioned to believe that healing and success and change are like these big, huge, sexy experiences that like slowing down a breath for a half of a second, one or two times a day seems insignificant because we're wired to believe that. I would recommend just trying to put some little like reminders in different places and start to build awareness. That can look like a post-it note on your laptop. That can look like a reminder on your phone. For anyone who has an Apple Watch, they actually have a setting it's a breathe setting, and it'll just vibrate gently and say breathe or like stand. There's tons of different apps and stuff, but I have to state a caveat about the breath stuff.
Sure.
The world of breath work is this super huge field, and a lot of it is geared more towards things like Wim Hof, which I don't know if you're familiar with, but Wim Hof is the daredevil, climbing the mountains in the ice, really extreme, intense breath work. And there's some science to support the efficacy and application of stuff like that. But for people with trauma, it is so important to not get sort of tantalized by those types of experiences, because those will also really compound stress, trauma, and dysregulation in the nervous system. When you're already stressed and you're already breathing dysfunctionally and you're already got all this trauma and fight or flight, the last thing in the world you need to do is actually go jump in a tub of ice or breathe really intensely without these other tools. It's literally 100 steps ahead of where most people need to be,
right.
But it's so addictive and it makes a great Facebook post, and people are really, really being drawn towards these things as these healing modalities and heal your subconscious. And it's all about mind, and it's actually causing so much dysfunction. So I just have to state that if you hear, oh, breath work is good, and you go to Google and you type in breath work, you're going to come up with 90% of the stuff out there is not actually appropriate or helpful to people with trauma, PTSD, dysregulation. Right. It's actually harmful. So a breath training practice of just simply starting to be aware of your breath as many times as possible. That's foundation one. And I have an entry program, and the first day it's all about awareness. And again, it's the least sexy and big thing of this is all going to change your life. It's slow down, and for 3 minutes a day, just tune in and feel what you're feeling in your body and connect to your breath. People don't think that that's going to get them anything. They're looking for something much bigger, but that's the most important step, because if you don't actually know how to slow down and just slow your breath and connect to what you're feeling, everything else is like trying to put the windows on when you don't even have the foundation laid. So it's really as simple as just trying to be aware, set some alarms. You can't really overdose it on this one. The big thing that you want to be careful with this one is that you're not forcing the breath and you're not taking this really big inhale and then trying to force the breath. It's like 5-degree difference. That's how subtle it is, because that is going to tell your body, oh, 5%, that's not scary. That's doable. I'll get on board with that. Most people can relate to the concept of when you're told to do something, you have that little inner rebel that's like, no, now I'm not going to do that, even if I was gonna, right? It's like, raise your hand if guilty. Your nervous system is kind of like that too. When you try to push it, again, stress trauma my whole life, and now I'm going to push it with this Wim Hof and heal it, it's going to go back even further.
Right.
Try to bring it to the table, talk therapy, it's going to kick back. So you want to think of like 5 to 10% changes progressively, and the nervous system will be like, cool, that doesn't seem threatening. I can get on board with that. And that's actually the key to working with trauma, dysregulation, and these types of things. So yeah, make it a goal to do like 10 breaths throughout the day. It can be 5 and 5. It can be 10 different times. It could be 10 all at once of just slowly exhaling. It's also really great to use when you find yourself in an activated state, like driving down the interstate, someone cuts you off, and that, for one, you get angry and then your heart rate goes up and it's like instantly you feel that panic, that surge of fight or flight energy.
Yeah.
5 breaths, just a slow exhale. And that will help drop you back down into, hey, we weren't in a wreck. Everything's fine. We don't need to carry that through the rest of our days. So that's a great way to work with that one.
And those of you that are listening, most of you are in your vehicle right now listening. Don't get upset. Just take it.
Just breathe.
Just breathe. Take a breath with a little extra. Don't force it. Like Holly said, don't force it.
Yeah.
It's going to be fine.
Yeah. And the one additional way, to kind of going back to that body awareness thing, to add to this, because you can do them in tandem, and this is a great way to sort of amplify the practice of the breath.
Yeah.
When you go to take that first breath, literally just notice what's tight. Is my jaw clenched? Are my shoulders up by my ears? Is my neck? Am I hunched over? Because a lot of people carry this sort of like, it's a protective energy actually, and it's also perpetuated by our stress and phone world. But we find ourselves in these positions that are actually like protective positions. Like, I'm about to get eaten by a bear, somebody's about to attack me. It's sort of these like coiled up positions. And so when you take that breath, you can kind of, I actually saw you do it a minute ago. It's funny because you did it on camera, and it always happens when I'm taking people through this. Like, they're always doing these things, and I'm like, yep, this is what's happening in your nervous system.
Calling me out on my own show. I got it.
It's actually a great reflection of, again, if you're standing up tall, you're not in the face of a threat. If you think of what would a kid do if they were afraid, they would be curled up in a little ball, right? Well, we do that at our computers. We curl up in this little ball because stress and tension is making us try to hide from the threat. There's a lot of science, and this is actually another tool, but if you're dealing with anxiety, that's also a state of fear. It's, I don't feel safe. I don't know why I don't feel safe, but your nervous system is like, there's a danger. You automatically stand up straight. And it's called the hero pose, the superhero pose. You can take it an extra level and put your hands on your hips. But physiologically, the signal that sends to your nervous system and brain, I mean, there's tons of science behind it. It's mind-blowing. It says, I'm confident and like, I'm good. So our body follows the state of our nervous system. And that means that we can change our body to change the state of our nervous system. Again, if you're hunched over and you're all stressed and you're curled up and you're like, I feel so anxious, we'll change the position of your body. And then your brain will say, oh, wow, we're okay. They're standing up tall and confident. It's getting the signal from that. Same with the breath. If you're slowly exhaling, the body has to conclude there's not a threat. So this is how you take your conscious control over your body, and you start to send your nervous system signals of safety. And over time, the more and more you do this, different pathways start to happen. When you get in your car, you're not automatically stressed because your hour commute every day makes you want to just lose it, right? You start to get in the car and you're like, cool, this might be stressful, but I know how to regulate myself through this. And I'm going to be aware, and I'm going to drive, intelligently. and everything's going to be good, but you're not in that state automatically the entire hour to work, an hour back from work. And then by the time you get home, it's like the classic walk in, kick the cat thing, because you've got so much stress and tension built up from all the things during the day. So it's these easy, super easy little things that you can do throughout the day that start moving the needle.
Right.
They're not going to heal everything. Again, there's a lot of pieces and levels and over time that you want to go through, but it does start moving the needle. And when you do that, like you just mentioned a minute ago, when you just take that one breath and you actually feel that you can go from like a 100 to maybe a 99 or a 95, it's like, oh,
Big
that's
difference.
cool.
Yeah.
And then you keep doing it, and suddenly again, your baseline is lower, and then you drop lower, and you start to feel like a completely different human. It's really, really incredible how powerful it is when you learn how to shift your nervous system states and how different you feel.
Holly, for those that are listening and that want to get in touch with you, how can somebody reach out to you?
So Brain Body Speak is like my platform across the board. So it's brainbodyspeak.com is my website. Brain Body Speak on Instagram is my page. There's a lot of different free tools and stuff. I've got freebies, I've got tutorial videos, lots of different things. But then, of course, there's the big, deep program that people can go through as well. But I try to make everything accessible to people. Not everybody has the option to work one-on-one with somebody, but these tiny little tools are so incredibly powerful. And I just want to encourage anybody, don't think that you only can get better if you are working with someone. There's a lot of different things. It's about consistency that you can build over time that will truly start to change. So yeah, I just want to say that because I know there's a lot of coaches and therapists and people are they've spent a lot of money on them and they haven't gotten better. And I want to kind of empower people that they can take control over their healing journey and they can start using these tools.
I think that's really cool that what you're doing. Let me ask you a question. When it comes to working with men or women and different challenges, who would you say has more of a challenge as far as and they're harder to get help?
Well, my gut instinct is to say men for a lot of obvious reasons, but I also say that reluctantly because there's such specific nuances to each side of the coin.
Okay.
Specifically with like women and abusive situations, there's a huge barrier there that's not really talked about. So it's almost like they're equal depending on what level you're looking at.
Okay, so let me ask it this way then. What unique challenges then do men have when it comes to getting help or seeking help?
Yeah. And to speak to that one specifically, it's the classic stigmas of from the time little boys are born, they're told to, suck it up and push through, and big boys don't cry, and all of these different things that sure we can look at. There's a healthy masculine grit that needs to be kind of cultivated into young boys and initiation and all of that. I'm actually very pro like positive masculine dynamics. However, that is also destroying men. Yeah. And it's destroying men in two ways. One, men have a very quick implosion with dealing with this stuff and trying to, especially when they have this innate desire to be a good husband, a provider, be a good dad, the pressure to be good on top of all of this pain and this dysfunction is like eating them from the inside out. It's eating them alive. They try so hard to hold it together, to be the man, to just suck it up, to keep pushing through and to disassociate from their body, that they have sort of an instantaneous exit. And the two causes that reflect that are heart attacks and suicide. And those are both two huge, huge players and two of the leading causes of death for men. We can't keep looking at success as you've got the job and you got the wife and you've got kids and that's it.
Right.
We can't keep looking at success even as you're not an alcoholic, or your dad was an alcoholic, but you don't drink. There's so many different nuances, and it doesn't really matter. This is an important point to mention about trauma, because I'm about to speak about trauma. Trauma is not the thing that happened to you. And this is where people get really confused, because not only do people who have gone through trauma tend to diminish their own trauma because of the abuse that came adjacent to it, but they tell themselves it wasn't that big of a deal. I should just get over it. I should be, fine. Like, I just need to forget about it. It's not about that 5% conscious perception of trauma. It's what their nervous system and their body thinks about that. So, again, for a veteran, people automatically recognize that going to war and being on a battlefield is really traumatic. Like, nobody will argue that, right? They come home and then they have this PTSD. Layman's, everybody understands that. But nobody understands that there are a million other ways that that same thing can actually happen inside the nervous system, from negligent, as like having negligence during childhood, from being beat up as a kid, bullied, from sexual abuse and assault, from like there's so many different other things that create that trauma in the body of I'm not safe, I'm not going to survive, and that imprint happens, and it's the same program. And so I needed to say that because a lot of people think they judge their own pain by saying, well, I didn't go to war, and my friend Bobby, he went to war. He has a reason to be upset and struggling. I didn't. My alcoholic dad who beat up my mom and was never at home, that wasn't traumatic. We come up with all these ideas of what trauma is, and we diminish our own pain. And again, it's not really about, there's no universal trauma score, like a stamp that we get. If you had a level 10, you had a level 2. Yeah. It's subjective to our bodies and how they experienced it based on the support we had, how long the trauma was, so many different elements. So I say that because, again, I think a lot of men, specifically, women will have these conversations. They'll talk about the abusive relationship they were in and how it was traumatizing, or their dad wasn't around. Men don't, because we're not taught, like men aren't taught to talk about these things. Yeah. And they internalize it. They internalize it by also judging their own pain and then compounding it with shame. They feel ashamed for feeling bad. They feel ashamed for feeling inadequate, ashamed for any mistakes they made. And shame is the number one most destructive emotion for humans at all, but it's specifically the highest driver towards addictions. When we have so much internalized shame, we cannot cope with it. It literally is the inescapable feeling of I am not okay, I'm not worthy, I'm not good, and you'll do anything to escape that pain. And addictions are the number one way we escape that. So men have to be able to learn to open up and have these conversations, and also acknowledge the pain and destruction they have internally. And when they start to do that and they can start to heal it, they truly become different people, because they're not carrying around all that pain and that shame internally. And they get to be the man that they're actually trying to be, but they're not being drugged back by all of this stuff. So the conversations need to happen, for one. Yeah. Men to men, peer to peer, but also in therapeutic spaces. There's obviously, this is a whole other rant, but there's, from the Me Too movement and all these different movements that are very necessary, they've also made men even more afraid to like be or exist. They don't know what to say or how to act or how to navigate. Like, there's so many different levels where men are just feeling very lost. They don't know who they are, where their place is in this world, how to deal, how to navigate, and like what to do next. And so there's an epidemic of male loneliness, males losing their sense of purpose, not having community. And really, the suicide rates reflect that. When a purpose and a sense of I'm capable, I'm confident, I can do this, and I'm valued, the shame and everything eats them alive, and so does the trauma and the pain. And again, there's a point where that's too insurmountable. It's too much to handle. So there's a lot of nuances there, but that's it in a nutshell, the different dynamics that men deal with and why it's such a barrier for them getting help.
So all you men out there, I used to say, like, you kind of got to put your pride aside, because I thought, at least in my personal experience and people that I know, it was like kind of a pride thing. It was like, oh, you got to suck it up. Because you go back to it, and it was just like you were trained to just be like, you suck it up, you lace up, and you just move forward with it. And it was like, and then the last couple of years, it's like, it's okay to not be okay. And I'm starting to see with a lot of veterans and even active duty people, and we've had special operations community, a couple guys on the show in the past that are they're starting to talk more about it. Like even now, the military, I think, is starting to catch some of it, and I say very, very little, but it looks like it's starting to move in the right direction. That even when you come back from a theater or combat zone or downrange, whatever you want to call it, having set time where people can go in and talk about their experience. So, and instead of, because there used to be a stigma like, well, if there's something wrong with you and you're seeking help, well, then you're no good to this unit anymore. You need to go X, Y, and Z. And that's not the case. They don't want that turnover rate anymore. So I think that's good that more and more people talk about it. And I know for me personally, it was like once I started talking about it to like people that I trusted, then it was just kind of like, okay, I feel a little better.
Yeah.
But it's not like a one-time thing. Like it's a constant.
Yeah. And I think one thing to mention there, because I just predict that somebody could be like, wait a minute, you just said that talking about your trauma is re-traumatizing, but now you're saying you should go talk to people.
Right.
There's a big differentiator here.
Yeah.
In therapy context, it's somebody that you don't know, you don't trust, you don't feel like they relate. It's clinical. Right. It's a very clinical professional relationship. And then it's also very forced. And so there's a lot of different dynamics that make that very different than sitting in a group where you have community and it's peer to peer, where you feel seen and understood.
And a lot of times somebody that's been through what you've been through, so they can understand what it is you're talking about because they've had similar experiences, or maybe they were there with you when said trauma happened.
Yeah. And that's the co-regulation aspect of our nervous systems. Our nervous systems literally regulate with the nervous systems around us. So if there's somebody in a group that's further along and they can kind of hold out a hand that says, I understand, I get it, I've been there, and here's what I did, it sort of gives permission to that next person. And it's just a completely different dynamic. So I just thought it was worth mentioning that community support is really different than like a clinical talk therapy, or it's just so incredibly different. But the other caveat, because I got caveats for everything, groups can be kumbaya, let's stay in our pain forever. There are certain groups that are like that. And so there has to be a dynamic that's healing focused and forward focused, where it's not just everybody comes in a circle and talks about their problems. It's I'm struggling and what's next, and how do I get support, and how do I lean on my, peers here. And I think that's where a lot of people, again, they're like, I went to a support group for struggling veterans for years and I just felt worse and worse because there wasn't that next step. There was no tool, there was no healing, there was no path. And even in my own chronic illness journey, there was a point where I was so desperate just to feel seen and understood by somebody else that was as sick as I was. And I literally stayed in like these communities for 5 minutes because I could sense and feel I was fighting to get out of my chronic illness, still accepting it and acknowledging it, but I was moving towards healing. That was my goal. And I was like, everybody here has set up camp and they are never leaving. Right. It is just, oh, how bad it is. And again, it is bad. Trauma and PTSD and chronic illness and all of these things are horrible. So you want to feel seen and understood, but it has to be like, that's the first step, and then move forward with the healing.
And you got to want to take that step. And we're not saying it's an easy step to take. Let's be clear on that. Because it's not.
Yeah.
It's not. But you got to get to a point where you're just like, you know what, enough's enough. And it's not going to be easy, sure, but you got to take that first step if you want to heal.
Yeah. And one other thing that I think is really important to say, based on something that you mentioned a moment ago, is like the pride element. Again, that's innately masculine, and then it's also driven in culturally, right? It's the counter to shame. When we feel like it's a personal deficit that we're struggling, that's what creates shame. I'm weak. I should be able to suck this up. I just need to be tougher. What's wrong with me? Shame, 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 shame makes everything 1,000 times worse. The reason that I love this work so much is not only do you not have to sit and talk about every single problem and dissect it for 10 years like you do in talk therapy, but when you see the clinical neuroscience and the actual proof that this is happening inside your nervous system and your brain, it doesn't feel so personal. It's like, oh, okay, well, if I have the parking brake on, of course I can't mash the gas pedal and go anywhere. It's that simple, like 1 + 1 = 2. And so when I teach people and I take people through my work, it is so about, again, a very simplified version of the education, not because I need them to understand for it to work, but because when they understand it, it takes away that shame. They're like, oh, again, if you were in a car wreck and your arm was broken, you wouldn't have any shame about that, right? You would understand it needs to go in a cast, it needs to heal, you might need a bone set, and it would take a certain amount of time. But when we go through trauma and any kind of mental or psychological struggle, we're told that it's a moral deficit, that you're just not a man or you're just not tough enough if it gets to you. And that compounds the shame. And it's also the big reason why men don't reach out, because they're like, nobody would get it. It's my fault. I'm a failure. I'm hopeless. And guess what? The best way out of that, suicide. And that is a huge aspect that we have to be able to address. And it's why I love this work. People see the charts and they hear the analogies and they're like, oh, that makes sense. And you can kind of depersonalize your experience, because I always joke with people, I'm like, you actually have much less of a personality than you think. And people are like, what? That's always a statement that gets them. And I'm like, you're basically a collection of brain pathways, hormones, stress chemicals, and nervous system states. That means that if you think you're an anxious person or you're an angry person or you're whatever label you have, that's just a result of the state of your nervous system. And that means you can also change that and be very different. On the other side of this work, the number one thing that people tell me is, I feel like a completely different human. I didn't know I could connect with people or laugh or feel joy, or that I had a sense of humor, or that I could enjoy golf, like all these different things. It's like life goes from being black and white to in color when you get out of these stress states and these trauma states. And that is changeable and trainable. So that's the beauty and the hope is, it's clinical. There's science to prove this isn't a you problem. And the science also proves we can change it. So it doesn't get any better than that. It's not a mental diagnosis of you have this condition and this is what you have to deal with for life. Like, I was told I was going to just die young. There was no cure. And I was like, I don't believe that. Like, if my brain can change, then I can heal my brain disease. And I did. So it's important for people to know those two things. It's not their fault, but it is in their capabilities and their responsibility to heal and change. And that is possible.
That's deep, like really deep. I had a question, I forgot it, but I got another one here.
Okay.
We're coming up on time. Actually, I got two more questions for you before time runs out. We had talked about, this is something we'd mentioned about holistic approaches earlier, briefly. And I know that's kind of a big thing that's been happening the last couple of years. You know, a lot of people are doing, you see, TBI and stuff like that. They're doing stem cells. And you're not seeing a lot of it, or if any of it, here in the United States. A lot of people have to go overseas. I know a lot of veterans that have gone overseas, different countries. There's several different places that people have gone. Microdosing on mushrooms and ayahuasca and all of these other different types of holistic approaches. And there's more to that. But why do you think there's a lack of that for men or even the veteran community, for that matter, as a whole?
Yeah. So I have such a nuanced in between belief on almost everything. There's so many people that are in one camp, again, of this therapy is great or it's not great or whatever. And I really tend to have a middle of the road thinking about everything.
Yeah.
And that's important because I think psychedelics and things like plant medicine, psilocybin, ayahuasca have a potential place for healing, but I think they are being grossly overused, misused,
Oh, yeah.
and really causing a lot of destruction. So that is my belief. As far as why they're not available, I think you have, again, this very alternative, new age, sort of esoteric world that's sort of taking over with psychedelics and spiritualizing everything. And then you have like the Western medicine model of clinical trials and the FDA. They couldn't be further opposite.
Right.
And so those are never going to mesh, even though there's sort of this middle way that's like, no, the science of psychedelics, there's institutions, there's all this research showing. However, all of that being said, you tend to hear about the winning examples with stuff like this, just like with breath work. Wim Hof changed my life, all of that. Those are the people that scream it from the rooftops. They create pages, they become coaches, programs, they talk about it, they write books, right? And it gives this false illusion of, oh, this is the thing. This changes brain chemistry. If I have depression, I just go on this journey. It's not so cut and dry. It can have just as much of a potential to cause a lot of harm to people. And there's a million different reasons as to why, from the way people methylate and their genetics and how they process those things and how they can actually harm the brain, to further on down, if you go through that big journey and your body is so traumatized and dysregulated, on the other side of that, you actually get much worse. And I've seen that happen a lot. So there's a lot of people that are championing for these therapies and saying veterans should have this and we need to make this accessible and everything. And I mean, those movements are hard charging.
Mm-hmm.
I am kind of on the sideline saying, yes, but we need to be very, very, very careful. And the prerequisite for any of those, in my opinion, is somebody should go through at minimum 6 months of deep nervous system and brain-based therapy to get themselves in a very stable place.
Yeah.
They know how to have body awareness. They know how to tap into their emotions and express their thoughts. They know how to regulate their nervous system. And then if psilocybin is going to be the ticket for them, it's going to be on a very, very solid, stable foundation and have the best chance of working for them. And in addition to that, a lot of times if people did that for 6 months, they wouldn't need the psilocybin anyway. But it's like trying to take a tiny little nail that you need to put into the wall to hang something really small and light and like taking a sledgehammer to it. Well, that's not the tool that you needed.
Right.
It was way too, and it just caused, now you've got a hole in the wall. And how do you fix that? So there's a lot that we need to navigate very carefully. And I think people get so blinded by the research, they get so in rabbit holes and very, tunnel vision.
Yeah.
And they attach to these things that they miss the forest for the trees. They miss these other elements that need to happen. So I think whether it's breath work, spiritual healing journey, ayahuasca, working with a shaman, or a psychologist, no matter what realm of healing you want to do.
Yeah.
And this isn't even discussing things like detoxes and, nutritional protocols and stuff. But no matter what you want to do, when you do it on a dysregulated body and nervous system versus a regulated body and nervous system, you're going to get two completely different results.
I agree 100% on that. So I've had people where they've done the journeys and whatnot, and it's been successful, and then 6 months later, they're like, what happened? You were good for the last 6 months when you did it, and then you stopped doing it. So it was almost like you got to continue to do it, but you weren't doing you thought it was like a one and done kind of a thing. You weren't working afterwards. I've seen people. Well, I look at it like this. There's something out there for everyone. It's just a matter of finding what works for you. But that being said, I'll go back to what you just said was if you don't have a good foundation, it really doesn't matter what you do.
Yeah.
Because your foundation is rocky. So you need to have a good foundation to begin with anyway.
100%. And that's across the board from diet and exercise.
To
people
everything.
go
That's so important.
extremes. Yeah, they go on extremes and they end up back at square one and then some.
Yeah.
And it's no different with healing. And the greatest part about the nervous system stuff is you may have one specific set of symptoms or issues that you want to heal. But when you work on your nervous system, you're going to heal 100 other that you didn't even know existed.
It's almost like I'm kind of, it's an aha moment today because it was just like, oh God, that makes so much sense. And it seems like it's so easy. Like, how come we haven't been doing this to begin with the entire time? You know what I mean?
That was my thought process when I really went into this world. I had been in health, fitness, nutrition, self-help, all of this.
Yeah.
And then when I learned this, I was like, this is the foundation that controls all of those things.
Right.
So like, why isn't this where we're starting? And that's my goal, is to help people start at that ground level. It's the most important. Build from there, but you can't build a house without the foundation first.
Holly, you're on a show called The Decision Hour, right? And we got to make decisions every day. And you've shared some decisions, but name a time in your life where you're on the line and you have to make that decision. What is it, and what's the atmosphere like for you at that time?
one that just pops to mind is really walking away from the stability of the income I had as a bartender and pursuing my dream of starting my business at 23. Like the environment was, I was surrounded by inebriated, drunken idiots, smoky bars and loud music. And I had been studying this health and fitness and nutrition and trauma healing. And I just knew that I had a big mission and vision to share with the world. And I walked away from all of that without a single plan, goal, backup, anything. I just had the little logo sketched on a bar napkin. Kaizen concepts. Kaizen means constant and never ending improvement. And I walked away and was like, I'll figure it out. And I've always said that I like to jump off the cliff and figure out how to fly on the way down. And that's kind of how I've operated my whole entire life, especially in business. But that was sort of the defining decision that changed my life from the trajectory that I was on, that I could have still been to this day, serving people drinks and perpetuating that world, or helping people heal on a deep level. So I think that's probably the one.
I love it. I love it. Holly, thank you so much for spending time with us today. We appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you.
Absolutely. Folks, we're going to have all of Holly's information in the show notes below. Her website, social media channels, make sure you check it out. And before we let you go, make sure you go check out Heroes Media Group, our parent company. Check out all the new shows and articles that are going up over there. That's all the time that we have today, folks. Until next time, you've been listening to The Decision Hour.